Hello and welcome back to the programme, the Libertarianism.uk podcast with me, Andy Duncan. Now, this week's guest is pretty incredible. He's Mr. Mises in Sweden. If you're from Sweden, you'll know who he is. He runs his own website, the Folkungating website, I think that is. He's also heavily involved with Mises.SE, and we'll talk about that later. And here he is, Klaus Bernpaintner. Hello, Klaus.
Hello, Andy.
Now, that name sounds a bit German to me, so is it German?
It is German, yes. It's actually Bavarian, to be specific. Bavaria is the Texas of Germany.
Yeah.
So,
now, I've been out in the sunshine in Gibraltar all weekend, so I'm probably bright orange on the camera. Where are you in Sweden, and what's the weather like there?
I'm in the southeast corner of Sweden, so from a fairly safe distance from the capital. About a 5-hour drive, 5-6 hours, depending.
Is that near to Karlskrona? Because I've been to Karlskrona.
It is actually Karlskrona, the archipelago of Karlskrona. I live on an island.
Oh, okay, because there's a great pub there. Was it the Fox and Hound, or it used to be there?
Yeah. It's
in Charles Square.
It's a naval town. It's an old naval town. The city is actually an island which used to belong to a farmer in the 1700s, and the king decided he wanted this for an ice-free port, so he could fight the Danes any time of the year. Stockholm freezes in the winter, but this doesn't. So this is great. So he stole it from the farmer. The
state always getting involved in terrible ways. Now, we might come back to that later on when we talk about the Swedish central bank. But the topics for today, we're going to talk about the Swedish economy and Bernie Sanders' view that the Scandinavian model is perfection. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the Swedish central bank and its story. And then we're going to talk about a virus of unspecified origin and how that was treated in Sweden a while ago. And other things we might try to squeeze onto the end. We might try and talk about Mises.SE. We might try to talk about a conference that Klaus was running this weekend, which was the Folkungating conference. We might talk about SWEXIT as well, or a Swedish exit from the EU. But we'll try and squeeze that in later if we can. Now, coming back to the Swedish economy, Klaus. Bernie Sanders and his kind of acolytes in the US have long talked about the Nordic model or the Scandinavian model and how they want to aim at that as socialist perfection. And yet in a recent survey, I think that was an index of economic freedom, Sweden came out ahead of the US. So Sweden scores 77% out of 100 and the US only scores 70% out of 100. So what Bernie wants is he wants a more free market. He wants more free market America, heading towards the more free market Sweden. Now, was that survey correct? Is Sweden actually more free market than the United States, and more free market than we actually think it is?
It's a very complex question because all these surveys, if you've ever built an index of something, you use 25 factors. And first of all, you need to grade these factors from 1 to 10 or whatever. And then you need to take an average of these factors. And then you may want to weight these factors so that some factors weigh more heavily towards the index than others. So I can build you an index if you want that proves that, say, I don't know, take Venezuela is the most economically free country in the world. Just let me know, and I think I'll get it for you. So all these indices, they're basically used by people who want to model a certain, copy a certain model. They'll just be, okay, Sweden's good. We want to be like Sweden, so let's make an index that puts Sweden at the top. I saw another index the other day that said Sweden is the second most dangerous country in the world for women to visit. So,
well, there you go. So, is it true then? Do you feel? I know you've got this huge welfare state, and we'll come to that later. But aside from that, does it feel like it's economically free in Sweden?
In certain aspects, it is more free than the US, because that was the comparison we had. For example, you can open a barber, the hairdresser, without being licensed. In the US, you need to be a licensed hairdresser to cut people's hair. You know what could happen otherwise. Could be really bad results. in other regards, it is less free. So it's fairly easy to open up a company in Sweden. The tax authority is frequently ranked the best authority in Sweden because of their extremely high service level, which means it's easy to get hold of them.
Taking money off you with a smile.
Exactly, and they even have a vision. We have the public authority with a vision. Their vision is a society where everybody does their part.
Yeah. I know in the UK, they've come up with one of the most complex tax codes in the world, apart from maybe the US. And then they've shoved all these regulations onto people, so people have to fill in their own tax forms or pay an accountant to do it for them because it's so complicated. And if there's ever any problem, they have this call centre, Inland Revenue call centre. You call them up. If you get through after an hour, you'd be lucky. And even when you get through after an hour, the person there is totally useless. So at least they're doing some things right in Sweden.
In other ways, it's also a very open economy for better and worse. So wind power, for example, Sweden is well situated for wind power, and we have all these countries from all over the world coming into Sweden and building these hideous wind turbines all over the place. You get Chinese, a big chunk of Chinese. You have French. You have Americans, of course, the BlackRocks and all those guys. So it's a very open economy, which I don't agree with in that sense. So in that sense, it's very easy to do business and to plunder the resources and destroy the environment of the country.
Yeah, and kill all the birds with those wind machines.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, I've tried to put it off, but let's talk about the welfare state then. So I think before the Second World War, before World War II, Sweden had one of the lowest set of taxes in the world. And that's where most major famous Swedish businesses, Saab, Volvo, and etc., came from that low tax environment pre-World War II. In World War II, Sweden wasn't in the Second World War. So you had this really low tax, high growth economy. It didn't get wasted by the Second World War. So how did you end up going into this horrible welfare state?
Well, you have a very historically important couple called the Myrdals, Alva and Gunnar Myrdal. They were social engineers par excellence. And they wrote a book in the 30s, I think it was. If I translate the title, it's called Crisis in Population. In the 1800s, they had this idea, this Malthusian idea, that Sweden was poor because population was growing too fast, too many mouths to feed. And then there was a big emigration to America. So, yay, great, we get rid of people, we have more food. They forget that people have two hands and one mouth. It's always possible to feed yourself if you have the resources. Anyway, so that was great, and also birth control became legal and popular. And then later on, the people started. Wait! All these people are leaving, going to America, and nobody's having children. Yeah, we need to change this. People are focusing on some material things. So they wrote this book saying, okay, we need to fix this. We need to make it easy for people to have children. So basically, they just have babies, state takes care of them and gives them the right ideology. People check them, parents check them in when they're born, and they check them out when they're finished, when they're adults.
Wow.
So we'll just take care of that. They just make the babies and we take care of them. And coupled with this, because they understood that this could cause the wrong people to have children. So an important component of this was eugenics. So
oh my goodness.
Get rid of bad genes and encourage people with good genes to have children. Now, that part was never fully implemented. So, yeah, you get the idea.
I know why Goering used to go to Sweden a lot, didn't he? And I can see why he liked the place, if that was the kind of thing that was going on there.
Yeah, I think this originally was an American idea, actually, to be fair. Anyway, it's funny, this Gunnar Myrdal, he got the Nobel Prize for economics, which is a fake prize instituted by the Swedish Riksbank. They kind of piggyback on the glory of the Nobel Prize. So he got the Nobel Prize shared with none other than Friedrich von Hayek in 1974, just after Mises had died.
Yeah.
So ironically, those two people shared the Nobel Prize for.
Yeah, we might come. Actually, let's talk about them now, because I think they did wait until Mises died, didn't they? Before they gave Mises' prize to Hayek. Now the Swedish. Let me just read out the proper name for this bank. It's the Sveriges Riksbank. It's one of the oldest central banks in the world. It's actually older than the Bank of England, which I used to think was the oldest bank, but this by a long way is much older than the Bank of England. And I was reading up on this, and one of the reasons for the inspiration for the Bank of England was the military success of Sweden in the Baltic, funded by the Swedish central bank. So the King William I think the third, after the Glorious Revolution in 1688, said we want to expand British military power, so let's create our own central bank modelled on the Swedish central bank. And then I think recently as well, they gave Ben Bernanke a Nobel Prize for Economics in 2022. And of course, the most famous one they gave, a central bank giving a big money printer and central bank person a Nobel Prize. And of course, probably one of the most infamous ones was the 2008 Nobel Prize to Paul Krugman. Can you tell us about the influence of the Swedish central bank on Sweden in the past and maybe recently as well?
So it's the oldest central bank in the sense that it was founded the longest ago, but it didn't start to work as a traditional central bank until after the Bank of England, actually.
Oh, okay.
It was in the 1600s. There was an entrepreneurial person who, Johan von Palmstrup, he had seen the Bank of Amsterdam, which was as a model, and we didn't have any bank in Sweden. So I thought, yeah, it's a great business idea. Why don't we set up a bank? So he got a charter from the king and set up this Stockholm Banco, was the name of it. And so it was part owned by the government, the king, and that's this person. And it was actually modeled after the Bank of Amsterdam. And interestingly, for those who have read Rothbard's banking model about separating deposits from savings and lending activities, it was actually modeled perfectly after this. So they had a deposit bank first. And it became popular because we had a bimetal standard. We had a huge copper mine in Sweden. It was one of the biggest in Europe, and it produced a lot of copper. At this time, silver was the currency, and they produced a lot of copper. And the mine was so effective that the price of copper fell in Europe and in Sweden. So the government said, "Hey, can we get rid of this copper somehow?" You know, they started making copper roofs on churches and official buildings, and some genius said, "Hey, let's make money out of copper." So we get rid of it, and it was also heavily regulated how much you could export and so on to keep the price up and so on. So let's get rid of the copper and make coins, and then we stamp on the coins the value in silver. And of course, as the price of copper fell, the size of the copper coins grew, and eventually they became
goodness,
huge. You can Google this. We have huge copper coins.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And on them is stamped a value in silver. Yeah, this is 10 silver dollar.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's huge.
It's a wagon wheel.
Yeah, so people couldn't carry these things, and so this bank became very
central
practical.
Banks and governments, don't you love them?
Yeah, so this bank became very popular. People could, just deposit these huge coins, and they get a receipt, and they can do business with that. And of course, this it was actually a robbery attempt, but they couldn't carry out the coins. They just left it.
Not strong enough.
Yeah. Anyway, so one day the king's representative walks in and says, "Hey, look at this! You have all this metal, all this coin deposited here for no use. Let's start at the second bank. Let's start at the lending business.
Oh no!
So lending out deposits, and that started a huge economic boom, of course. And they, in a sense, discovered or created, these bills, this paper money. And there's an old, what do you call not a dictionary, what do you call, like Encyclopedia Britannica. Anyway, a huge volume of, what do you call the encyclopedia? Huge encyclopedia, huge Swedish encyclopedia. Yeah, from the 1800s. And they say in really old-fashioned Swedish, the Stockholm Banco must be credited with the invention of paper money. This, however, led to the destruction of the bank. So at that point, the government steps in and takes over the bank. And then it's run by the government. And you can follow the different attempts of coinage. I have this great graph that shows every coin they attempted to, they started to mint. And then there's a war, and then the value of that coin, inflates away and explodes, and then they start a new one. And it looks like a hedgehog.
Sounds like the kind of crypto coin scams of the last sort of 20 years, doesn't it?
Yeah. Anyway, so that's and then I think sometime in the 1800s, inspired by the Bank of England, they started manipulating interest rates and so on.
Yeah, well, there you go. Are they doing it? Are they trying to get you into the euro at all? Are they trying to introduce CBDC, central bank digital currencies?
Yeah, they're quite advanced in the CBDC business. They haven't said anything about when and how and if, but they're working on it. So I suppose they want to control our money in that sense.
Yeah. Now, getting back to where we were, you've got this Sweden care system, which is like
and
the
NHS. There are forces who want to try to get us into the euro as well.
Yeah. How successful are they trying to get you into the euro, do you think?
There's not a lot of interest in the euro, but that has never stopped them before. We had a referendum on the euro and people said, nah. And then they said, okay, we'll probably join sometime in the future. I think there's some paragraph somewhere saying that eventually we have to join if we stay in the euro, in the EU. I don't know. The powers that be, they of course want us to be part of it.
Yeah, well, let's hope the EU collapses before that. Before we get any closer to that. Now, getting back to that welfare state, there is still a huge welfare state, even though you're coming up high up in this freedom index. How do people like you and entrepreneurs and so on in Sweden deal with that? I mean, there's the easy way. You just go and live in Malta, or you go and live in Hungary, or you just go and live somewhere else. But how do people deal with the welfare state in Sweden itself?
It depends if you're a payer or if you're in the paying end or on the receiving end. How do we deal? We who don't. Basically, if you, just some practical examples, so you want to go into the emergency room. In practice, we have redefined emergency because you can sit there waiting for 8 hours. It's not unusual. You sit there and people are screaming around you and they try to do some kind of triage and take the most urgent cases. So what you do, if you look at a stock market crash of 1930 or something like that, take anyone. If you zoom in close enough, you don't see. You zoom in on the chart close enough, you don't see that there's a crash going on. You will even find periods of when it's going really well, people make money and so on. But if you zoom out, you see, wow, this was a huge crash. And from day to day, you don't notice how this welfare state is being eroded. But if you go to the emergency room and you wait there for 8 hours, you realize it. And you see this in many parts of society. mail, for example, postal system. We used to have, they would carry out the mail on Saturdays. And then they went to, when I was little, and then they went to just weekdays. And now we're down to 2 or 3 days a week. Granted, they don't send as many letters these days, but you see this in many parts of society. A slow collapse as the welfare state just consumes all resources of society.
Yeah, we see the same thing in the UK. In my lifetime, you used to be able to phone up an NHS doctor to drive to your house to come and see you. And as long as you called them before 11 a.m., you were guaranteed to get the doctor to come to your house by the evening to come and see you. And now in my same lifetime, it's virtually impossible to get an appointment with a doctor at this. In fact, usually the appointments are now over Zoom. So you'll call up and call up and call up, and you won't get through by a certain time. So you have to wait till the next day. And then you call up and call up and call up. And then you have to go through some triage with some person you don't want to tell all your personal medical details to in some call center. And eventually they might book a Zoom appointment with you with a nurse. And then at the Zoom appointment with the nurse, they might determine whether you can have a Zoom meeting with the doctor. It's just absolutely horrific. And that's in my single lifetime, how bad the NHS has got.
Yeah,
So it sounds like a similar picture in Sweden.
Yeah, when I was little, I remember I had the mumps, and I remember clearly we had a doctor come home to us for that.
Yeah.
It's not, I wasn't even, dying.
Yeah.
Great service at that time.
So just in a few years, the whole thing has just gone down in both countries.
Yeah, and it's a lot of entrepreneurs, they buy private health insurance or medical insurance, so they can get appointments and treatment in time because they can't afford being, out of business. And of course, the politicians have the same. They have the same kind of private medical service.
Yeah, that's nice, isn't it? We're going to run the system for you, but we're going to use something better on the free market.
Yeah, because we're so important.
Because we're princes. We're angels. We need to be kept healthy. Now, coming on to the kind of health system, back a few years ago, there was a virus of unknown origin that arose in an unknown part of the world and affected a lot of the world. Now, according to what I was reading in British newspapers, everyone in Sweden should have been dead. And yet you had a guy, Anders Tegnell, who somehow managed to steer you through the whole thing where you didn't all die without all the silly policies and the forced mandates that were being introduced everywhere else in the world. Can you tell us about that experience in Sweden going through that virus of unspecified origin?
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting. Now, there was some email leaked with a conversation between him and some other medical people, wherein it was quite clear that he wasn't perhaps the brightest guy in this in the medical business. He asked some very, very basic questions like R naught numbers, what do they mean, and so on. But what he had was experience. He had experienced the bird flu, the swine flu, and some other scares like that, where the government had and the media had made this, big circus and scared people half to death. And the government had ordered lots and lots of medicines, injectables, and they basically had to throw everything away.
Yeah, don't say the V word, whatever you do.
No. So he had seen this kind of circus before. So his attitude was, well, it's just another one of those. It will pass. So let's not do anything stupid. We didn't do anything stupid then, so why should we do something stupid now? So basically, he didn't get the memo, so to speak. He didn't, because the organization in Sweden was that the medical authorities was quite independent of the government. So the memo never reached him. So he did, and so he did what I thought was fully quite reasonable. And yeah, so that's how we ended up not doing a lot of drastic things. Now, eventually, they had to get rid of him because other people had received the memo. So eventually, they turned over the responsibility for this crisis to the government. And then, of course, they started doing lots of stupid things. But we never had this.
I didn't know that.
We never had this masking mandates. I went to the hospital once, for example. There were signs, please wear, mouth, I didn't do it. Nobody told me to do anything. So
it was a lot crazier than that, and a lot of other places in the world, including where I was I didn't have to. I was supposed to wear one outdoors, which was ridiculous. So I just put it around my chin to avoid the police trying to get a $20 bribe out of me. So I did read, now you'll correct me if I'm wrong, I did read that at the time that Anders Tegnell was still in charge, politicians and even the king were going crazy trying to introduce all these stupid policies that were introduced everywhere else in the West. But the Swedish legal system stopped them from doing that. Is that correct?
I think that's fairly correct to say, because as I said, the responsibility for this was delegated to a fairly autonomous authority. And we have a way of doing things here that, politicians can't just go in and override what the authorities do.
Yeah, panic and overreact. Yeah. So what were the consequences then of this policy? Because everywhere else in the world was saying that you were all going to die in Sweden because you weren't overreacting and being stupid like everywhere else was. But you seem to come through with better figures than everywhere else, less excess deaths than everywhere else. Is the policy going to be the same the next time one of these viruses of unspecified origin hits?
Well, who knows? Because our politicians are very happy to give away our self-determination, self-governments to supranational organizations like the WHO. So when the WHO next year comes with this new constitution or whatever they have to take over, pandemic policies of sovereign nations, I'm fairly sure that our politicians will sign this. So things can be very different next time.
Yeah. Now, I just wanted to get into, before we kind of wrap up for the day, about Mises.SE. We'll talk about the Folkungating conference as well. So is Mises.SE, is it successful? Is it actually stemming the tide of all these kind of advances into the EU and so on? And will it be the kind of seed which will hopefully help Sweden in the future?
So the activity at the Swedish Mises Institute has been fluctuating. And I would say for the past 6 months, maybe it hasn't been very active. Maybe some organizational changes coming soon. And I think so we've had this, at the Mises Institute, we've had two legs to stand on. One has been the Austrian economics science leg, and the other one was libertarianism, the sort of philosophical, political leg. And I think there will be some changes so that it will be more focused on Austrian economics. And there'll be probably some new leadership coming in. I think a name you will recognize. And there will be more focus on Austrian economics. And that's kind of also why I started this other initiative, which is more focused on cultural and libertarian and self-governance ideas, kind of like the PFS.
Yeah,
be more broad.
And you've just had your, I think it's annual conference, and can you tell us how the conference went?
Yeah, it was a great conference. There were about 55 people attending, so it's fairly small so far. We've been running. This was the second. We've been running this for 2 years, and it was it was great people coming, genuine people, actually families, mothers and children as well. Talked about, it was for a whole weekend. So people arrived on the Friday, sat up late, and talked and discussed and had good food. Then Saturday, there was the actual conference with 5 talks. I had one on how to work with local government or shame them. Was one about Orania. Was one about living free in the countryside. And one more. Can't remember right now. But what I was introducing in my talk was a new youth program aimed at young men, young Swedish men, because there's a war going on against white men, young men. They grow up in a very, very toxic environment in the schools where they are bullied. They are being taught that they are the pest of the world. They are, prospective rapists and colonialists and racists and all this stuff. So I see a need for helping them realize that they have value, they have importance, they have an important job in the world. So we are starting this youth program with 25 different goals for them to accomplish. And it's both things like from a traditional scouting program to more. Also, there's a political aspect, understanding basic economics. What is political power and how does it evolve? Why do societies come and go? There's an historic aspect, your own family history, local history, Swedish history, Western history, and actually also a Bible section, Know Your Bible. So it's a kind of a combination of scouting, basic military, not training, we don't do any weapons, but kind of that.
Yeah, I think you'd get compared with other youth movements in the past if you did that. Now, I've read that...
We want to keep a low profile to not attract undue attention.
I've read that in Sweden it's possible, much more easily possible to start up a private school than in other countries around Europe and in the US without too much state interference. Is that true? And if it is, are you going to open your own school up for children there?
It would be great. We had socialists for many years, and they have been trying to erode this system. At the moment, we have a conservative socialist government, and they're allowing.
We've got the same thing in the UK. It says it's conservative, but it may as well be Tony Blair.
I talk about red socialists and blue socialists, so we have blue socialists now. So you can do that, but there's quite a bit of there's a few hoops you have to jump through, but the main problem here is that you still have a national curriculum, so you can't swerve too much away from it. But if you have the right people in place and so on, then you can do it in theory. But you need to have a state-approved headmaster. And it's very hard to find state-approved headmasters with the right views on things.
So it's free in name only then, really, a bit like the English private school system where, again, they have to follow a national curriculum and it's just smaller classes and better teachers, but they're still teaching the same stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of where this initiative that we're starting is a little bit of a counterweight to the national curriculum. Okay,
so I'm just going to ask kind of my final question then. It's, I forgot to mention SWEXIT. I did read a few years ago about a SWEXIT campaign to get Sweden out of the EU. Is anybody pushing that, and is there any chance of that succeeding?
There's no active organization that can be seen, that is seen a lot pushing for this. There is a small party, which is not in the parliament, that have tried to push against EU and NATO membership. but they're too small to be in the government, in the parliament. Recently, the Sweden Democrats, the right-wing extremist nationalist party, they brought it up again that we should think about what a Sweden without EU would look like. Now, they were EU critical at one point, and even NATO critical. But then the last few years said, yeah, let's try to work within the system. But now they brought it up again for discussion, because they are not very fond of the idea that the EU should decide our immigration policies into Sweden. And immigration is their kind of their main issue.
Yeah. So that does bring me to my final question then. So how are you feeling about Sweden's future? Is it a good future? Or are you thinking about leaving Sweden to get away from the high taxes and the welfare state and so on? Just finish off, just give us an outlook for where you think Sweden's going in, say, the next 10, 15 years.
I think it will be hard times, but I also believe that if there's the awareness and the will, you can do anything. And I intend to be part of that camp, trying to raise awareness and being a force for doing good things and trying to put things right. So I'm an optimist at heart, and I try to spread that view, because it's very easy. I usually say you can try to affect people and change things in two ways. You can either tell them how bad things are and how rotten everything is, and hope that they will take down their pitchfork from the wall and go out and drive out the bad people. That doesn't work very well, unfortunately, because they become disillusioned and they just give up. So, and I think a better way of doing it, the other way of doing it, is trying to show people, we've been a great people. We've had hard times, and look over there, there's the solution, and we can do it. Hope and change. So I'm positive, and I've lived outside of Sweden in the US for a number of years, because I wanted to protect my children from the school system. But I believe it's not really necessary. You can, if you have a good, close relationship with your children, you can help them survive this, and they actually become stronger by becoming critical thinkers. So I intend to stay. I understand people who do give up, but I think it's not the right thing to do.
Yeah, it's nice to meet a positive optimist. I speak to quite a few people, and it's probably about a third of us are positive and optimistic, and 2/3 are getting quite miserable and a bit pessimistic. So it's nice to meet somebody who is positive. Now, before we wrap up, where can people get hold of you? Have you got any podcasts? Have you got a website that you'd like people to know about?
Yeah, well, it's in Swedish, but you can always run it through some translation tool. We have it's called Folkungen. I don't know if you can link it. Folkungen.SE.
Yeah, I'll link it in the show notes.
Yeah, and we have a podcast that we run every week, where we talk about current affairs, and we also talk about old things, how people solved things a few generations ago, and we can learn from that. So we try to connect to our history and show that people have solved these problems before without building a huge, fat welfare state and without having huge governments and so on. And also provide some hope. And that was actually the idea with this conference that we had, is to give people a sense of, there are more of us, and we're growing, and there's hope. And that's what the feeling people came away with, and that's a success to me.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time. Hang on. I'm going to try some Swedish. So here we go. Tack för din tid idag. Did that make any sense in Swedish at all?
Thanks for your time today. It was perfect. I should say.
Oh, okay.
Just in closing, this Folkungen is named for a medieval group of Swedes who were fighting centralization of power in their time, which at that time was the Pope tried to subject Sweden to his power. Now, people were Christian, but they didn't want to be ruled from Rome. They wanted their own laws. So that's the philosophy. It's kind of an anti-globalist movement, self-government.
Well, we have a similar thing now, don't we, where we don't want to be ruled by the Treaty of Rome, which created the EU, and actually, what was it? The Temple of Jupiter is where they signed that agreement to bring us all into the EU.
Oh, yes.
Anyway, Klaus, that's been fantastic today. I'll put all the links to everything he just spoke about in the show notes. Thank you for your time today, and thank you everyone else who's watched this so far. I hope you enjoyed the program so far. If you did, if you could please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could share this video down one of your favorite social media channels, or just give us a nice easy like, smash a like. That would be very much appreciated at this end. Anyhow, Klaus, I'll see you next time.
Will do. Looking forward to it.